This is Edwin K. Morris, and you are about to embark on the next Pioneer Knowledge Services Because You Need to Know, a digital resource for you to listen to folks share their experience and knowledge around the field of knowledge management and nonprofit work.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Annie Green. I'm actually talking to you from Alexandria, Virginia, which is right next to our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. I am in the field of digital transformation, and this is by way of knowledge management. I got introduced into a new way of thinking to identify intangible values within an organization, and I began thinking, how can we actually leverage things that we don't know? I could talk about this for hours because one of the things I want to see is I actually want to see our environments a little bit better with how we engage employees and how we actually leverage what we know and how we know to utilize and improve the organization. So sometimes what my area is, I want to look at the top and see and make certain that we establish strategies that actually take into consideration all components of an organization, which includes the employee, which takes me right back to knowledge management and them as an asset and the value that they bring to an organization. My mentor in this field was Michael Stankowski out of George Washington University. Michael introduced me to knowledge management and subsequently led me to my dissertation topic, which was around intangible assets, such that we can begin to recognize what is truly bringing value to organizations and improving their performance and their overall bottom line.
You talk about digital transformation. So does that require a digital strategy, or people just follow the regular strategy an organization already has?
The overall strategy should incorporate everything. And the point is, when you're digitalizing something, you're actually creating your reality into a digital world. So therefore, it doesn't change. But you have to determine if the AI infused tool or product, or if the digital component fits into the function that it's supposed to fit into. For example, if you were a transportation company and you have drivers and you have vehicles and you decide to go with autonomous cars, then you really aren't replacing the function. What you're doing is you're actually automating portions of it, and you must then incorporate it into that particular function of the organization. So digitalization should be aligned with your current strategy formulation, such that you can see the value that it's bringing at that particular point.
Wouldn't a CIO or CTO, somebody that's in charge of the tech, already say, oh, we're already doing that? We already do that.
Yeah, and you know what? This is what's called process improvement. And we've been on this path for a while. You know, we kind of started out with, we eliminated people, we downsized, we right-sized, we actually did business process reengineering, and then we got to process improvement, and we're actually even still pulling in some of those ideas, you know, with Scrum and Six Sigma and all of that. But again, when you look at those, you'll find out that they are just components of the total picture. For example, even when we sit back and we do like Scrum and doing change management, we figured out that you don't necessarily go after the whole. If you go after the whole, then sometimes it's difficult to pivot out when a problem happens. So by breaking it down into functional components where you can actually work on one piece at a time, and if something happens, you can pivot quickly and come back, or as they would say, fail quickly, that works a lot better. The methods that we're changing are really good, and they're actually responding to some of the issues and the problems that we have. But the problem is, when we implement a method, we implement it as a total solution and not necessarily as a new improvement to the current process.
You led off with the concept of automation, especially your example where you're going to automate driver. You're going to remove the human element and just replace it with an automation. Does a digital strategization, is it heavy towards automation or just processes in general?
I think it's more so heavy toward automation, because what we're doing is we're automating the processes that we have. And most of the time they are routine. But we have also gotten to a point now where we can actually put more of our forecasting types of activities within the intelligence piece of it. So that actually helps the machine to think more for you, not to replace your thinking, but to think more for you.
Right.
And that's why, when people are filling in certain things and it can come back and tell you, hey, you forgot this part of it, it's still part of the same function. Now, part of cleaning up some of what we have is that perhaps we're capturing too much stuff that we don't necessarily need. And we need to look at that and see if we have a lot of noise around the data that we're capturing. But with digital transformation, I think what's happening is that, especially with Corona, it kind of plummeted us into this field of, now we have to use these tools, and we have all these new workspace tools because you know what, we're more remote than we are on-prem, as they would say, on the premises. I think that kind of skewed it a little bit because I think in that process, we have actually forgotten about digitization and we're more doing digitalization. Now, the difference in that is if you're going to be representing something in a digital world, then you must represent it as it is in the real world.
Example, please.
Yeah, if I'm to be represented in a component or algorithm or something that's within the digital world, it should adequately represent me. Because if not, the data is flawed.
Okay, can you walk that dog a little further and give us a hard example of what?
Okay, let's look at an algorithm that might look at competence. Okay, this algorithm it looks at behavioral cues, and those behavioral cues might even be the amount of time that you take to respond to something, which might give them indication that you perhaps don't know it. What that is doing is if it doesn't represent this person, that they have you would call as neural diversions, where the brain develops and works a little different, then it might consider that person to not be competent, whereas that person is fully competent, but you've built into the algorithm just to fit for people who aren't in that category.
Understandable.
Okay.
So do we have to start looking at inclusion in the digital transformation?
Absolutely. You know what? It should be there from the start. I'll give you an example also of that. Like with Washington, D.C., as I said, for my nation's capital, one of the things that they have realized is the discriminatory behavior that's happening within algorithms. So in 2021, they actually identified an act in order for them to eliminate or ban discriminatory algorithms. Now, here's the somewhat problem with that. It wasn't considered from the beginning. Along said with systems that if you don't consider those things from the beginning, then when you go to put them in later on, it's going to cost you way more and it may not be introduced into it properly.
So what's the fix for that? How do you address that? And more importantly, how do you enforce it?
Well, the thing is, you're right. How do you enforce the act? The thing is, we missed the opportunity because we know what discrimination is prior to developing them. So we should have the right people at the table to ensure that even if your developers are not educated in that area, that you have someone there that can tell them we need to consider this. Yeah. There are a lot of things like that because even like I was at Georgetown, Kathy O'Neill, who wrote Weapons of Math Destruction, there was a conversation that came up about jobs and being able to screen people out of jobs. And a lot of times with resumes, and even resumes or even online, they will ask a person, what are some of your hobbies? And sometimes they'll gear you or steer you towards certain hobbies. And they might ask you, well, what genre of music do you like? And when you say, oh, I like hip hop, then you're automatically assumed to be African American, and they will screen you out of that particular that consideration. You can't expect the developers to know all of that because those are not the fields that they are experts in. And that's why when you build a system with requirements, you need to understand that.
Let's talk about something that you brought up before, the mindset, tool set, and skill set, seeing as we're talking about domains of knowledge an individual has. Can you walk a little bit through what you're thinking of this? And would you consider these value-based parameters or just organizational concepts?
Yes. Within the organization, if we're trying to create a digital twin or digitized organization, right, that means we must build it based on the reality. And the organization should be built objectively and based on the goals of the organization. So that's how the employees should be trained. You can't change employees from their mindsets of what they've had for years, but you can put into place controls and mechanisms that will ensure that they are following the policies, procedures, and standards that you have established. I think a lot of times what we want to do right now is we ignore it and we say, well, they're just people and that's just the way they're going to be. That's okay. But when they cross over into the organization, you have values there that need to be instilled and move forward as well. The mindset, I think that we need to change the mindset of people that once again, and I hate, I'm not trying to be cruel with this, but I think that we have a very selfish nation right now. And we have to change that mindset to let people know that it's not just you. In your domain of your home, it's you and your family, and how you react might be differently than when you come into another environment and there are other people that need to be considered too. So that's why we have to look at that diversity and inclusion. And a lot of times it's not necessarily that they're trying to do something wrong, but it might be good intentions, but it might be naive competencies. It might be that people just don't kind of know, and until you tell them, they can't do better. But when we don't take those things into considerations, then we wind up building the wrong models, and also the wrong data is being captured, which is why we need to make certain at the front end of that data management that we're clearly identifying what we're going to be using in our decision-making digital tools.
Based on everything we've just spoke about, how would you grade organizations now? Is it a pass or a fail?
I think it's a fail. And you know what? All of the information is actually showing us that. When you look at the Everett Group study and Forbes and also McKinley, all of them are in the 70th percentile of failure. I think we don't truly understand why. And I think it's because, again, we're looking at digitalization. So we're putting products in place that have AI within it. But we never thought about how those products or how those AI components were actually developed or digitized to be represented within the organization.
So how do we get there? What's your prescription?
We stop and take a step back. I think everything can be fixed, and I think we have a lot of components that can work together, but I also feel as though the area that we fail in is integration. We stop thinking that things work together, and we have so many stovepipes, and we have got to change. That's that mindset too. We've got to change the mindset that we have to collaborate and that we can't just do things independently.
So who owns this in an organization? Is it the chief knowledge officer, or the CEO in particular just has to drive all this? Because somebody's got to own it.
It's all over the place.
Yeah. Okay.
I totally agree. And right now it's all over the place. I see where they have CDIOs, where they have CDOs, they have chief digital officers, chief data officers, chief data and information officers, chief information officers. I said, you see what I'm saying? So none of that is separated. But here's the thing, it actually evolves up through. And sometimes the chiefs in the areas, you got to really delineate it properly. Now, the old way of looking at when we talked about knowledge management, we actually went up the triangle that said you started with data, you go to information, and then you go to knowledge, and then you go to wisdom. And even though that's existed for years, most people didn't see the transition up through it. So I've kind of said, let's change the narrative of that because we're missing a major component. Data is where we start, and we have to know what data we're capturing, and then we have to know how we're going to use that data. But that data drills up into domains. It fills in certain domains, and at that level is where you actually integrate it with organizational development as well as organizational behavior, because those things come into play, and you get DEI there. So that's the domain level. Once you get to that domain level, information, then you can get to intelligence, because that's where we're talking about our neural networks. Because our neural networks are the cross-pollination of all of that, to not only know what's there, but to discover what's there. So now we're at a good point where knowledge management was tacit and explicit. We're at a good point where we have good explicit knowledge that is based on evidence and reality. So now we're into knowledge management, and we begin to test to see how that works. And you know what? That drills us into the cognitive level, which is awareness and attention. Once we start going up that path and we start identifying, it doesn't have to be a chief data officer, but it has to be somebody who owns that. And then we have to have information, and we already have a CIO, so they should be able to handle that next level. I don't know where we have for intelligence. I think they bring in maybe the chief digital officer there, and then you have a chief knowledge officer, okay? And then at the top, you don't have anyone for the cognition area, which is the area that actually drives your strategic formulation and gives you insights into where your major areas of improvements are within an organization.
That's a good point. We've got all the parts and pieces.
Right.
It's like you got the perfect recipe, but nobody knows how to put it all together. Nobody knows how to bake the cake. It's like, oh my gosh. But when you were just talking about that, it's almost, so you've got the layers and the domain owners and all those things, but it's all, once you got to the pinnacle, so it sounds like there should be a co-leadership model between the CEO or the president or whatever the label is,
Uh-huh.
whoever's the chief bottle washer is, and maybe create a chief cognition officer that is
Mhm,
a
mhm.
doctor of osteopathy, is more a holistic doctor, right? Is more
Right,
like the whole
right.
thing. And you almost need that. So it's almost like a shared leadership possibility in a new organizational structure because, all these things you've been talking about. And I'm like, how do you hire that
Mhm,
digital workforce? What's the magic item you're looking for in their
mhm.
capabilities to bring in to be that in this new world of organizational paradigm?
Absolutely, especially if you're not aware of what you need.
What do we shop for when we're looking for people?
And plus, we've changed so many things too that concern me. Like for example, systems engineering was the development of systems. So that was the total kit and caboodle. That was automation or technology needed, the information and everything. And a lot of companies actually dwindled that down to it being a network person. They've missed the whole concept
Eh,
of system development. So when you
yeah.
start advertising, if you look the tools that they have, they're looking for people now. When they look for a systems engineer, the functional capabilities and what's expected, or the skill sets and also the tool sets they need to work with, all of that's missing because that's not the true systems engineer
But
that.
but it seems like there's a element also a shift, and that's my general viewpoint is that some organizations are kind of getting away with the certifications, the pedigree, so to speak,
Mhm.
and getting more into the human. Are you adaptable? Do you have grit? You are can,
Yeah, and I hope they don't do that because I do think that you need those certifications,
uh,
but those certifications need to be that they actually certify that a person is competent and qualified to do a job. I think organizations in the past, unfortunately, they would hire people who were capable, and capable is not competent. Capable means that you have the ability to rise to the competency level. But with the certification should certify that you are competent. And so once you walk into that position, you should be able to perform that, the role well.
eh.
I think we need to rethink that as well because we've confused the roles. Even at the higher level of the chief levels, I have seen where organizations, even if it is an executive and the executive has no background in a particular field, they will move them into one of the chief positions simply because they were already at the executive level.
Yes, I've seen it. It's like, oh my good gosh, they've homegrown these so-called chiefs, and it's like that's almost a self-defeating parameter
Mhm.
to the organization because you're really limiting.
Absolutely.
I understand how it happens and kind of the
Mhm.
why, but it sure doesn't challenge what the organization could be doing.
And it's a disconnect. When we start talking about the brain and that we need to emulate this and how it's thinking, and most people, neurology is an interesting area. And we don't understand the brain because the brain actually has what's called the mind that regulates the entire body. The brain is normally that brings it together and say, okay, this is the area we need to address at this point, which fits with strategic formulation. So the executive should be able to look into what is a scorecard or dashboard and see these are the areas. But that comes from, again, those neural networks of the cross pollination of all of those things within the organization, that give you insights into what areas you're supposed to work in. So that neural network that you're talking about, that is your mind. It should touch on everything that's within an organization so that you can see where your high leverage areas are and also where you need to change.
Well, the challenge of that concept is that the human frameworks has got a bunch of autonomous systems that are unconscious happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you run into the
Uh-huh.
problem, right? Is that how can you mirror in an organization to get to the unconscious happenings and like you say, having the dashboard
Yeah.
to be
Well,
able,
we have them.
but they're built by
Mhm.
people. So I worked with an organization in implementing the dashboard concept. It looked great, briefed well. Hey, yeah, that's what we need. Red, yellow, green. Yep, great. But they really didn't think of the implementation pain of trying to understand what are the metrics we're trying to
Mhm.
capture to give us the indicators to begin with. What
Absolutely.
happened was my job was to go to these different departments, different heads, and all these,
Okay.
and start saying, okay, so what do we measure? And what happened was that once I started looking under the hood of what they said to measure, I'm like, why the hell are you
Yeah.
doing it like that? What,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah,
Where do you
yeah,
start? So I think there's
yeah.
a
You
catch-all.
have to know.
Well, and then that became a cultural rub in that organization because then people are like, "Oh, I don't really want to show you how we do things because then you're going to say, why do you do it that
Yep.
way?" You know?
You know,
Ah,
I think they have to be open also to sense making because you know what makes sense and you know what's common sense, and common sense is not within your structures. I think sometimes, and this is again my personal opinion, but we need to let the egos go. If you have an ego and you think that someone else shouldn't be smarter than you because they're at a lower level, you need to rethink it. You can leverage people, and plus,
wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. You're talking about major layoffs now.
major.
Check your ego at the gate. Don't bring that ego
Yeah,
in here. Oh
yeah.
my good gosh. You're talking about building the utopia. Come on.
And well, that's part of that mindset. Do we want to succeed? Because we're in a very disruptive state right now. I mean, do you want to go down with the ship or do you want to save the ship? Actually, what I'm talking about is actually the work that I'm doing right now and building a model from that, from my dissertation of where do we start, which is where the values points within an organization, because that's where we want to gather the information from. And we want to build structure so that we can actually build networks to know how they work together.
Speak more to this value-based construct, please.
The value-based construct is actually called a framework of intangible valuation areas. And what I did was I went out to CEOs and I asked them, what do you want to know within an organization? And it's interesting because there have been a couple of studies that have actually validated this, and I've had that in some of my write-ups. But there are 8 areas within an organization that makes up an organization and where you get your value from.
Could you please list off what are they called again? The 8 domains or the
Yeah, they're value areas, intangible value areas.
Can you explain to me what these value areas are in an organization that you've identified?
These value areas they complete an organization. They start out with things like employee. You want to know the contributions of the employee. You want to know contributions of partners, vendors, contractors, anybody that's supposedly on your value chain that adds value. Things like information. And most people kind of say, why information? But a lot of people need information to do their jobs. And a lot of times there have been studies that show that people spend 20% of their time looking for information that they don't have to do their work. And most of the time they don't find it. So no one's measuring that impact. And then you have technology. Technology is not our solution. It is inserted into the way we work to add value. So we need to determine if the technology we're putting into place, even like with these AI-infused tools, if they're working to perform the way that we need to perform. We also need good business processes. You know, we've been going through this for a while where we've been trying to make them lean and eliminate wasteful activities and things like that. So that's a value area. And then product and service. You know, of course, we want to make certain our products and services meet our customers' demand and that they're of quality. The next is our customer. We want our customer to be happy. So we need to understand what's making our customers happy, who are our most profitable customers, and who, to stick around on leads. And then last but not least, we have the area, and I called it competitor, but then I changed this to be like marketplace. We want to know where we stand in the marketplace because that adds value, such things as branding and that sort of information. So those are the 8 areas.
So you're saying use these as your calibration tools or your gauges. These are your gauges on your dashboard. So how do you measure value? And also, I kept hearing you're wanting to measure the positive value, but I assume you're also going to measure the negative value.
Absolutely.
So you're going to do a scan of all these gauges, who's involved or in these gauges, right, in these domains or areas. And you're going to identify pluses or negatives in that area. You're going to somehow run a summary total.
Well, you would have indicators.
Through the
indicators. You would set up key performance indicators around them. And then you roll them up together, too, because we've been talking about the different capital areas. So when you look at this, and we do employee and customer, we can look at relationships between employee and customer, employee and competitors, employee and partners, and even we can start looking at competency.
Oh, so that's a whole other layer, right? So now you've got your primary areas, and now you've got interactivity between areas.
Yeah, that's what I call the cross-pollination. Yeah,
that sounds pretty rich.
And that gives you your neural network.
I like it.
Yeah.
Neural network. So you're going to build an AI that does all this?
To be honest with you, I have built it. No, I have actually built the architecture for this.
I want the beta of this so I
Yes.
can try it out. So let me know when you're ready to go to market.
I have laid out the architecture and everything, and it is actually called My Artificial Enterprise. And it is driven by what engine I call as Business Reasoning Intelligence Analytics Network.
Okay. Where do we sign up? How do I get it?
That's the book that I'm writing now. I'm writing the book,
all right.
My Artificial Intelligence, to get that out. Hopefully, it'll be something that people will see makes common sense. And you're right. It's equivalent to something like the gap, where you would have a reporting system to be able to report on intangible asset valuation versus, us only looking at tangible. And the reason for that is that intangibles actually account now for 90% of the value of an organization. So your people are valuable to you. Your information is valuable to you. Your technology is valuable. But now you need to know the true numbers. How valuable is it?
It's almost, and I don't know if I'm using the right term, but this is just popped in my head. It's like a truth table to the evaluation of that area, right? Just because you have technology doesn't mean it's adding any value.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's like you're really...
Absolutely. And it's interesting because back, I forget what year, but John Seely Brown and Paul Strassman, both of them did studies and demonstrated that the technology we were putting in place was adding zero value to the organizations. And I think that is still prevalent today. And I think that we are leading in that direction again, or headed in that direction again with AI. I'm not seeing where the value is.
It's just the next shiny thing, right? So we want to...
You got it.
We want to be distracted by the next shiny
thing. I like that.
Just people. Just,
human nature.
Funny.
That's why we got to change it. We got to change it. And it's evolution. It's the way we have evolved. And unfortunately, we need to stop and rethink.
Yeah.
And that's why we're in this whole era of thinking now. We have got to think, and we've got to be aware, and we've got to pay attention, and we've got to be able to recall. I think that we have failed at recall because there's so many things that we have done in the past that we're repeating right now.
Yeah. The first step to critical thinking in this viewpoint is to ask, what the hell's the value? What is the value of this? Mm-hmm. Frame it with the organization. What's the value of the organization to chase this next shiny thing? And is it worth our time and effort? Because it's pulling away resources that we could be doing something else right now.
Oh my God, you just brought back a memory to me. I had I had somebody working on my team, and he would come to ask me something, and then he told me later on, he said, it is just amazing how you just cut through the chase. He'd present something to me, and he'd think about it. I remember I looked at him and I said, well, is this bringing you value? Does it help you do this? And he's like, well, not really. I'm like, okay, how about this one? And he thinks about it. He says, maybe that's what happened. Yeah, this will work. I said, then why are you wasting your time on the other two? And he looked at me and went, this is amazing. He says, I get lost in all of the forest. And he says, and you just cut through the chase and say, if it's not adding value, then don't worry about it.
That's where that chief cognition officer in the organizational structure is going to come in handy to challenge all this and say, what's the value of my neural network spending time on this? I like it.
I see that as parallel to the chief financial officer. You're right. So I don't think we need all the chiefs down below, but we do need those two that complement each other, because together they bring in what is the total performance of an organization.
Exactly. Well, and then you're really putting the parameter of dollars mean something, and we have a CFO to make sure we're watching all those pennies and making sure there's value extracted from every penny. Right next to the knowledge or cognition person that's going to make sure all these processes and efforts are all making sense for the value of knowledge.
You got it.
Or wisdom, or whatever elevation we want to put
I know what you're saying.
Wow. I think we've just built a whole new organizational structure. All right.
Well, that we do need that. We need new models. I mean, but we can start with the old models as long as we can see how to improve them for the betterment.
Yes.
My biggest thing is when I came into knowledge management, it was supposed to be better, faster, cheaper, and I haven't seen that. And I haven't seen any of the measures that lead me to believe that we've been successful. So that's why I have to say I think we failed.
Yeah.
But failure isn't a bad
No,
thing.
no, as long as we
Yeah.
learn from it,
Mhm.
right? And that's the key
Yeah.
ingredient, as long as we're willing to reflect that we failed and it's time to change something.
I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
don't know how to not to do something unless you fail at something. So it's a learning tool. But you just don't want to learn when you've lost billions of dollars. You want to learn
well,
it's early
yeah,
on.
early on, yes. We've talked about a lot of things, and it's been very exciting, Dr. Annie Green, but I need to ask, what's your definition of knowledge management?
This is so funny. It is what it is. You know, I look at Webster, and Webster tells you the definition of knowledge, and I accept that. And it tells me the definition of management. So therefore, I know that I need a structure in place that allows me to be able to manage what knowledge is. So I need to engineer knowledge, and then I need to be able to manage and sustain it. So I'm through with the definition of knowledge management because it's been on the board too many times. And we got like, what, 1,000 definitions now? So I'm just going to accept the fact that
Yeah,
I'm trying to capture and create and build upon knowledge within an organization to improve
Well,
performance.
I'll take it. Thank you, Dr. Annie Green. It's been a great time.
Thank you, Edwin. I've enjoyed it too. Always a good conversation with you.
You have just finished our latest Because You Need to Know, a public service of Pioneer Knowledge Services. Please join us on LinkedIn and find us at pioneer-ks.org.